for whatever reason, we just didn't go to sleep. And that probably means that we couldn't go to sleep, we didn't get back to a safe place. For whatever reason, our evolutionary survival instincts, when we miss our sleep window, then go, okay, if we're staying up, we're staying up.
It's a brand new day. Wake up every morning and say, it's a brand new day. Take a good day, make it great, okay? 'Cause if you got some
All right, so today's topic on the Whole Parent Podcast is definitely a favorite of people who ask questions. We definitely don't have a majority of people who ask questions on a specific topic, but if there was one topic that is asked about more than almost any other, it would be bedtime. And so today we're going to be tackling 3 bedtime questions. By no means is this going to solve all of your bedtime issues, but I think we've picked 3 questions that really hit different things and really common denominators among many of the parents that are either in the membership with me or who just, reach out through DMs or email, who are on the email list. And so the first one comes from Lisa in San Francisco. She says, "Hi, my name is Lisa. My child's name is Emily, and she's 4 years old. Lately, I've been struggling with her testing boundaries, especially during bedtime. She refuses to go to bed on time, and it turns into a nightly battle. Emily insists on staying up later, and when I try to enforce bedtime, she throws tantrums. It's becoming exhausting. Can you offer some guidance on how to handle this defiance during bedtime with a preschooler without making it a nightly meltdown?" And I'll say, we don't make it a nightly meltdown, but how about without making it a nightly battle, right? We can't always control the meltdowns that our kids will have. We can definitely do some things, and we're going to get into that right now, Lisa. Wherever you are in the world, probably San Francisco, unless you're traveling when you hear this, we're going to get into that. And if you have a young one, whether 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're struggling with bedtime, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about right now is going to help. So the first thing that I would identify with a 4-year-old, and this is pretty important, obviously, kind of the nature of the questions coming in is that I don't have an opportunity to ask a clarifying question. But if Lisa is in the membership, which she's not, and she asked me this question in a group coaching call, the first thing that I would ask is Emily still napping? Because this is a question for 4-year-olds. I would say, I don't know the exact statistics on this, but there is a not small percentage of 4-year-olds who nap sometimes or all the time. Certainly, if Emily was 3, if we were having this conversation a year ago, that would be my first question. Is Emily still napping? And the reason why I asked that question is that one of the things I'm going to suggest in my answer here is that we might need to move Emily's bedtime up. We might need to make Emily's bedtime earlier. And I'll explain why in a moment. But if Emily was still napping, I would actually have the reverse advice, which is we might need to make Emily's bedtime a little bit later. And this is because by and large, you can get away until about age 6 or 7 with a 7 o'clock bedtime, with one exception, right? And we're not really talking about kids under the age under the age of 6 months or 9 months, right? Because they may not have a really consistent bedtime schedule of when exactly they're falling asleep. But certainly kids, let's say 9 months to a year, all the way up to 7 years old. And that's just the number I use because, 7 until 7. That's kind of how I frame that. It's an easy thing to remember. With all things, these rules are not, hard and fast. It might be 7:15, it might be 6:45, depends on your kid. But 7 before 7 is a general rule that I use for many parents, with one very significant exception, and that is kids who are over the age of 3, who are still napping for at least 1 hour to 90 minutes a day. And this is because I've talked to so many pediatric sleep specialists, so many sleep specialists who talk about this phenomenon of being undertired. And the reason why I'm starting with undertired before I go to overtired is because all of us this is what we all assume it is before we learn about overtiredness. We learn about how the body functions and how the body winds down, et cetera. What we assume when we try and put Emily down at let's say 7 o'clock. I don't know. You didn't say exactly when the bedtime is, Lisa, but we'll assume that it's later than 7. When we put Emily down, let's say at 7:45, right? Or 7:30. That when we're trying to put Emily down at 7:30 and she doesn't want to go down and she fights and she throws tantrums and she's always she insists on staying up later, is what you said in your question, that it must be that she's not tired. That must be what it is. She's undertired. And that very well may be the case for kids over the age of 3 who are still napping for an hour to 90 minutes to even 2 hours a day. Although many sleep experts kind of go back and forth on how long you should let your kid nap during the day, or how late you should start their nap. I mean, that's always a possibility too. You could start their nap a little earlier if it works for your schedule, and then they wake up. But this is because of what's called wake windows. And the idea with the wake window is that kids who nap have a certain amount of time that they're triggered to start releasing sleep hormones to get tired, to wind down, to go to sleep, based on a couple of different factors. One is routine. We're going to talk a lot about that here in just a moment. Number 2 is the time of day it is, right? How dark it is or light it is. But also, how does that work, John, when they go down at noon when the sun is highest in the sky? Well, number 3 is what wake windows. How long have they been awake? And with kids who are 3 who are still napping, or even 4, some kids nap up until 5, who are still napping, their wake windows get longer and longer and longer. And the reason why their wake windows get longer is because their hippocampus, which is responsible for turning short-term memory into long-term memory, it's kind of their like short-term memory storage device in all of our brains. They're learning so much when they're so young that it gets filled up. It gets all filled up with new information. And when does the hippocampus turn short-term memory into long-term memory? Well, when they sleep. And so it gets all filled up during that wake window. They learn lots of stuff and they get all this new wonderful information and all the neural synapse connections and neural pruning that's happening and all that amazing stuff that's happening in their beautiful, blossoming young brains. And they need to go to sleep for at least, 30 to 45 minutes, a full sleep cycle, so that information, all of that learning can be offloaded from the short-term to long-term memory. By the way, for those of you who remember college or remember high school and cramming for a test, and you stay up all night and you never go to sleep, you pull an all-nighter so you can cram for the test. The reason why many people do not wind up doing very good, or very well, I should say, on those tests is because they don't ever convert the short-term memory that they have just learned, all the short-term learning that they've made, into long-term memory. And why does this matter? Well, who cares if it's short-term or long-term, John? Well, we're really good at retrieving, not really good, I shouldn't say it in that terms. During the process of converting short-term memory into long-term memory, we organize it. Imagine it's like a pile of papers on your desk, and then they're all organized into their correct places, and it's moved around to your brain and stored in different places. That's what the hippocampus does, among other things. The reason why when you're studying and cramming for a test and then you go and you can't seem to recall the right information for the right question on that anatomy quiz, this was me, by the way, in college. For as much as you think I might know about anatomy and physiology now, or pretend to study those things extensively, at least, that in college I was horrible, awful at remembering and memorizing in that way. And a lot of that was because I tried to do all my studying in the short term. I tried to study immediately before the test instead of the day before. I never organized that information in a way that my brain could recall. So this is why, by the way, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 1-year-olds need to nap. They need to nap so that their hippocampus can turn, among other things. They also need rest, and for other reasons. Their brain also cleans itself at night. You guys don't know that maybe, but that's a really cool function. Removes neurotoxins. That's not some woo-woo thing. That's science. That's how it works. All that amazing stuff happens when they sleep. Is why little ones need to sleep. And what can result is when you have a 3-year-old who is really struggling to go to bed at night, it may just be that their wake window has extended and now you need to wait longer to put them down. This is why the 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old, 4-year-old who's still napping for an hour to an hour and a half a day, you might need to put them down at 8:30. And that's something that you almost never hear me say in other contexts, but you might need to because that might be their proper wake window. So that's undertired, and that's a possibility here, Emily, if you have a 4-year-old who's still napping. But more likely, I don't know if it's most 4-year-olds, or I don't know the exact percentage, but most likely, if your 4-year-old is not napping, you're actually facing the opposite thing, which is your child is overtired by the time they go to bed. So what does overtired mean? Well, undertired is obvious. It means that they're not tired yet. Overtired is less obvious. It means that they were tired, and when they didn't go to sleep in what we call their kind of ideal sleep window, when their body was starting to wind down and prepare them for sleep, when they didn't go to sleep, what happened was their body started to, for lack of a better term, panic, because instead of falling asleep naturally and kind of listening to their body and going, okay, I need to wind down, or maybe their parents, identifying some of the triggers, maybe rubbing eyes or yawning, or now I feel like I'm going to yawn, or what have you. Different kids have different triggers, or just the right time of day. You just know that it's the right time of day and you put them down. When you miss that, their body decided, hey, for whatever reason, we just didn't go to sleep. And that probably means that we couldn't go to sleep, that there was a danger, or perhaps we're traveling with our tribe or whatever. Remember, the brains are, even though brains of little ones are only a couple years old and still developing, they carry with them evolutionary memory, right? Evolutionary survival instincts. And so one of those survival instincts is when you don't go to sleep within your wake window, the body floods itself with cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And this is designed to help the body, which wants to go to sleep, and the brain, which wants to go to sleep, to stay awake, because, there's a threat, and, we can't sleep right now. We didn't get home in time to we didn't get back to a safe place. For whatever reason, our evolutionary survival instincts, when we miss our sleep window, then go, okay, if we're staying up, we're staying up. And this is why you'll find a kid, by the way, who, and this is also why you get slap happy if you stay up a little too late and everything seems funny, because you got a lot of adrenaline running through your veins. This is why so many parents report to me, I just kept making their bedtime later and later, and they were just bouncing off the walls, right? In this case, she throws tantrums, but it's not always tantrums. Sometimes it's just like, I want to play, I want to play, I want to play. If I miss my 7-year-old's wake window, by the way, his sleep window, I should say, not his wake window. I'm talking about wake window, so I'm getting confused. When I miss his ideal sleep time, he can stay up until 10, 11, even midnight. He can stay up so late when he usually goes to bed about 7:15, 7:30. And the reason he can do that, the reason he can stay up so much later, is because once his body decides we're staying up, the hormones kick in to make that work for him. And so it's cortisol and epinephrine, or adrenaline. And so the first thing I would do if your child is taking a nap would be to push bedtime back half an hour. The first thing I would do if your child is not taking a nap is to push bedtime up half an hour. Are you missing the wake window? And to say that sometimes that is all it takes, and parents who have struggled with sleep, bedtime routine doesn't work, all this other stuff for years, it feels like, maybe only months. I shouldn't exaggerate here, but who have struggled with this for months, at least weeks, and we can't figure it out. We try everything and nothing works. But then they move their kids' bedtime up half an hour, and boom, like a light switch, their kid's out in 10 minutes. It's been taking them an hour and a half to get their kid to go to sleep, and they're out in 10 minutes. That's the magic of actually working with the body instead of against the body. The body sends the right sleep hormones like melatonin into your child's bloodstream at the same time, or at a consistent time every day. And so in doing that, if you miss that, you're going to be in for a world of problems. So again, it might be, there's so many more things here that we could say, Lisa. We could go on. We could talk about bedtime routines as a way of triggering sleep hormones. But the fundamental thing I would try absolutely first, taking a nap, push it back half an hour. They're not taking a nap, push it up half an hour. If that still doesn't work, push it up another 15 minutes. Once you start getting to like 6 o'clock bedtime, then you know you're probably a little something else going on. And we gotta reset and we gotta figure out something else. But until you get to 6 o'clock, just keep pushing it up. And many parents will then say, well, that's impossible for my schedule or this or that. I know. It's really, really hard. One more note on this before I move on. I know I'm spending a little longer on this question than I usually spend on questions, but one more really quick note on this. For those who are hearing this and going, wait, John, I'm afraid that if I put my kid to bed at 7, when they have been going to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, that all of a sudden, they're waking up at 7 right now, they're going to wake up at 6 or 5 in the morning. This is a logical conclusion that you're making, but it's not grounded in actually what we know about sleep. And that is that sleep begets sleep. The better sleep that they get, the more you are in line with how their body wants to sleep, the more likely they are to sleep longer. So a child who is getting up too early actually is often a child who is having that cortisol and epinephrine in their bloodstream when they're going to sleep. So kids who wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, some kids just do, by the way. It's not always a solution to solve that this way. But some kids who are waking up at 5 and who are very cranky and seem like they need more sleep, but they just wake up at 5, and what can you do? You put them to bed earlier before their body tries to keep them awake, and they are able to sleep way later into the morning because they're not fighting with those hormones. And so that's just one thing that parents always ask me, but John, is my kid then not going to sleep in? Are they, going to start waking up at 5 or 6? Many kids just wake up at 6. Many kids just wake up at 6:30. That just might be in the future for you. I'm sorry if you're not an early person. I wasn't. For 7 years, I learned how to be. Now my kids wake up at 6:30. I got to get up with them. But that's how I would respond to that. Hey guys, John here, interrupting myself with 2 quick things for you. The first is that if you're enjoying this episode about bedtime and how to help your kid to feel safe and have a good bedtime routine, please consider going in and on whatever podcast app you're listening to, whether it's YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify, reviewing this podcast, not just this episode, but reviewing this podcast. You can just, hit that 5-star button if you're really feeling like this is benefiting your life, or, even better, write a full review for me. I read every single review that I get. So if you are listening to this and it's helping you, go ahead and review it. And then the second thing is to share this with somebody in your life who is a parent, whether they're struggling or not. We don't always know. But if you have another parent in your life of young kids, share this episode with them or just share this podcast with them. There is no higher compliment that you can give me, no way that you can help me more than simply by sharing this with other parents, because my goal is to spread the message of positive, conscious, gentle, authoritative parenting to the world. And the only way that I can do that is with your help. So go ahead, review this episode, write me a review. I will promise you that I will read it and then take this podcast, either this episode or another episode that might be more applicable to another parent in your life, and share it with them. Thank you so much. And let's get back to the episode. All right, so the next question is from Michael. He says, my daughter's name is Lily. She's 5 years old. Lately, we've been facing bedtime challenges with Lily. Specifically, she's been having frequent nightmares. She's terrified of going to bed alone, wakes up crying, comes into our room, which is affecting everyone's sleep. We're not sure how to address the fear of bedtime and nightmares without making her more anxious. Can you provide some advice on how to help a scared child settle into bedtime peacefully and conquer their nighttime fears? That's a great, great question, Michael, and something that many, many parents struggle with. The first thing that I want to say before I get into anything related to this is that we in the Western world are fairly unique in human history in the way in which our children sleep away from us. Now, don't hear me saying, trying to advocate for bed sharing and things like that. That's a whole separate discussion that I'm trying to have. What I'm saying is, throughout human history, humans have almost always slept in the same room with their young. Not always in the same bed, frequently in the same bed, but not always, but almost always in the same room. And it's only in recent Western history, in the history of human evolution, if you broke it down into a 24-hour period, right, in equal delineations, We've only been sleeping apart from our kids since about 11:58 p.m. if it's midnight right now, right? A very, very small, tiny fraction of human history. And by the way, even today, internationally, there are many countries in the world, some of the largest countries in the world, where sleeping in the same room as your parents is normal. That is the typical way of things. And so this idea that our kids are afraid when they are away from us at night is a typical and expected survival instinct that they really almost should have. Nighttime is vulnerable, right? We are afraid of the dark because our ancestors who were not afraid of the dark got eaten. And the ones who were afraid of the dark are the ones who survived. We have been afraid of the dark for a long time before we had locks and security cameras and lived in generally safe environments and lived in homes that, a pack of wild dogs couldn't get into. We have only been safe enough to sleep away from our young for a very, very small percentage of human history, or had enough infrastructure to sleep away from our young for a very small percentage of human history. And our kids cannot be expected to just immediately adapt to that. So just begin from the perspective of understanding that it is normal and natural for your child to want you at night. That is a hard reality for many of us to swallow, especially those of us who live in the United States where sleep training is very, very pushed as this is what we're supposed to be doing, and you're supposed to be getting your kid totally independent from you at night. I understand why it does affect everybody's sleep. It's not fun. I'm not saying that there aren't cases where you need to do this, but do so with you need to approach this first with empathy. Understanding that everything in your child's body is telling them, do not be away from the grown-ups at night. That's just how their survival instincts have kicked in for the last, couple 100,000 years. So that being said, our job is to help our kids to feel safe. One of the ways in which we can help our kids to feel safe, and some kids, by the way, are going to really struggle with this, and some kids are not going to struggle with this. Some kids, you're going to say, it's safe, and they're going to say, okay. And you might have 3 kids and all 3 of them do this differently. Some of them might say, I had no problem with this. And others might say, yeah, I really need you every night. My 1-year-old doesn't really need us very much at night, almost ever. He can wake up, look around. He's fine. He's almost 2. Go right back to sleep. Our 3-year-old goes through phases where he needs us, but for the majority of his life, does not. Our 7-year-old has needed us almost every night of his whole life. It's just a struggle for him. He is incredibly intelligent, and that means that he is incredibly aware of how vulnerable he is while he's sleeping, right? And so there are kids who are just more anxious in that way. And again, approaching that with empathy. So for those kids who are highly sensitive to this or who are anxious about bedtime, I'm going to give you 2 tips as it relates to sleeping, nightmares, bedtime, etc. Tip number one, before we get into the nightmares, is that you need to develop a ritual with your kids where they know that you are going to be available, aware that they're sleeping, that you're not going to just blow them off, that you're not going to just leave the house while they're sleeping, right? It seems very obvious to us as adults that we won't do that, but our kids need to be explicitly told of that. And so a ritual that works really, really well for many parents is to either stay with them until they fall asleep, which is totally fine. If that works for your family, great. And if that doesn't work, or if you want to move away from that over time, to check in on them at regular intervals. And those intervals can be increasing in time, especially as your 5-year-old becomes more accustomed to this. Hey, I'll be back in 10 minutes to check on you. And then maybe it's 12 minutes, and then maybe it's 15 minutes, and maybe it's in a given night, it starts at 5, and then it goes to 10, and then it goes to 15, and then it goes to 20, whatever it needs to be, so that they know you're going to be checking on me. I am going to be safe while I sleep. Either you're here with me, maybe they need you to be in another room, maybe they need to have a walkie-talkie, right? What I wouldn't recommend is trying to give them something to do while they're falling asleep. That doesn't tend to work as well with kids as it does with adults, because our mind can get distracted by things and then fall asleep. Sometimes there's it's much more difficult for them. Some kids it works for, but a lot of kids it doesn't. You can also have a night light. Obviously, that's a really popular thing. Night lights tend to not be really, really great in the middle of the night. If you have a lot of bright light shining in your kid's room when they wake up between sleep cycles, which by the way, all kids, all humans wake up between sleep cycles. It's just that we condition ourselves to kind of not worry about that and go back to sleep. A lot of bright light can kind of stimulate them to get up and to come looking for you. And so having a night light that's maybe on a timer goes off after an hour or so after they're asleep. That might be a helpful kind of in between. But checking on them is just a big piece because it just says, hey, I'm still here. You're safe. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Your adult is still here. And some of their evolutionary survival instincts can kind of just be eased. Then the last thing I'll say about nightmares is that the easiest way to help a kid with nightmares is to help them to use their imagination to dispel their nightmare. What do I mean by that? Well, the reason why kids can have nightmares so much more, and not all kids, but why kids tend to have more nightmares than adults is not only because they're more vulnerable, but also because they have much more expansive imaginations. And so that expansive imagination can be hijacked by themselves and be used to kind of come up with terrifying images. My son said the other day that he was really afraid that a gigantic spider was going to crawl out from underneath his bed, and that even if he, punched it or killed it or whatever he said, that it would break into 1,000 tiny spiders and they would crawl all over me. I'm like, man, if I thought that to myself while I was falling asleep, I would be pretty scared too, right? But my imagination's not that expansive. But his is, because he's still little. And so the best thing that you can do is actually to have them leverage that same imagination to make whatever it is silly, to leverage humor as the opposite. And I sometimes wonder if this technique, which is established in the scientific literature and in the parenting community and the psychological community, is what inspired J.K. Rowling to write this into the third Harry Potter book, The Prisoner of Azkaban, as the way of banishing a boggart, which becomes your worst fear, is that you make your worst fear silly or ridiculous, and you say ridiculous. Because actually this literally works on our brains. The very part of our brain that is causing us that discomfort can be the part of our brain that puts us at ease by making that scary thing silly. And so what I do when my kid has a nightmare is I go into the room and I say, how can we make this silly? And I'm very careful not to make all of it silly myself, because I don't just want to tell him how silly it is. I want him to make it silly. If I just tell him how silly it is, then I'm just not validating his experience of being afraid. If he develops the way that it can be silly, then he actually can get through it much more practically. And we're building lifelong skills, right? You can do this too. You can look at a horrible, anxious, anxiety-producing situation at work, and you can find the humor in it, and it's an amazing tactic for getting through that. I've had some really anxiety-producing things happen at my other job right now. Awful, man. So many cyclical thoughts, intrusive thoughts. What's going to happen? Is this going to happen? Fear. I just look at the humor in all of it, and it's so, so helpful. Therapists have been doing this for a long time. And so, especially with nightmares, this is a really effective tool. All right, our final question for our episode on bedtime, and I'm sure we're going to have so many more episodes on bedtime over time, because we can't even, begin to cover everything, is from Megan. She says, hi, my name is Megan. My child's name is Emma, and she's 3 years old. I've been having a tough time with Emma's bedtime routine. It seems like every night, right before bed, she becomes incredibly wired and full of energy. She starts running around the house, bouncing on the bed, and it feels like she's taking forever to settle down or go to sleep. I'm worried that she's not getting enough rest. Can you offer some help as to what might help calm my younger child down and establish a more peaceful bedtime routine for her? So, Megan, first of all, everything that I said to Lisa at the beginning, overtired, undertired, I'm not going to go back over it because it's very clear. 3-year-old, we very well might be, we just dropped our nap and we need to go to an earlier bedtime, right? A 3-year-old is the exception on both sides. So a 3-year-old who's dropped their nap should probably be going to bed not at 7, closer to 6:15, 6:30. And a 3-year-old who hasn't dropped their nap might maybe more like 8:30 or 8:30, right? Usually not 9. By the time we get to 9, no, we're pretty pushing it. We should probably be putting them down earlier so that their wake window doesn't land there. So everything I just said there, right? If we're napping, we got to go to bed later. If we're not napping, we got to go to bed earlier. That being said, we also, and this is why this is going to help you, Lisa, too, right? You guys get a double whammy. You got a double response today. We also can do some things that can help trigger those sleep hormones instead of getting triggered by those awake hormones. So Megan has kind of identified the perfect example of probably an overtired kid. My guess would be an overtired kid because it seems like, oh, she gets wired right before bedtime. That's because we just missed their wake window. It might be for Megan that we put them down 30 minutes earlier and it's boom, lights out, no problem. We're asleep real quick. But say that didn't work. Say we put them down 30 minutes earlier and we're still really, really struggling. Well, sometimes we can actually, or not sometimes, we can actually help those sleep hormones to hit right at the right time. And so this is my rule about that, or this is my suggestion about that. Every bedtime routine should be a minimum, hear this, a minimum of 30 minutes. So when I said we're going to put our kid down at 7, that means bedtime routine has to start at the absolute latest at 6:30. And the reason for this is that when we develop an established bedtime routine, our kids, remember the 3 reasons why our kid has their sleep hormones activated. This is very simplified. I'm not actually getting into all the science of how sleep hormones are triggered, but the 3 general rules, right? Light. So how much light is there? Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Can we put them in a darker room? We'll talk about that for the bedtime routine. Number 2, wake window. We've already talked about that a lot. Number 3, routine. So routine, the routine piece of this is number 1, having bedtime at the same general time every day. So the same physical time on the clock. That's really helpful, not just going with the sun, which I know a lot of families do and they feel that that's successful. They're relying more on the light than on the routine. Some kids that works, some that doesn't. But being more strict and rigid about the actual bedtime time, that's number 1. Number 2, to build a routine out that is the exact same every night, that is identical. So if we're going to do bath, we're going to do it every night. If it doesn't need to be part of bedtime routine, because we don't do it every single day, which is, by the way, okay if you don't bathe your kid every day, then don't make it part of bedtime routine. If you can't do it every day, don't do it as part of this routine, at least not for the first 2 to 3 weeks when we're going through this transition for Emma, as we're going to try and have her get to bed a little bit quicker and without bouncing off the walls. So we're going to develop a really simple bedtime routine. If you don't have one, you don't have to get cute with it. Daniel Tiger has a great one. Bath time, PJs, brush teeth, story, and a song. Cut out bath time out of that. You get brush teeth, or PJs, brush teeth, story, and a song. If you can stretch out that routine, PJs, brush teeth, story, and a song, or maybe there's a different piece of that. Maybe it's 3 stories and no song, whatever it is, to about 30 minutes, and then you keep it consistent, you are actually going to train your child's body to tell when lights out are going to happen based on, number 1, the time on the clock, number 2, the wake window, number 3, the darkness of the space, right? So this bedtime routine should all take place in low light areas if you can. This can work for nap too, but you don't usually have to do that as much. Kids tend to be easier for nap, generally, not all kids, but most, than bedtime. So low light environment at the exact same time every day. And you're actually going to, over time, train their body to anticipate when lights out is. And then their body will count backwards about 30 to 40 minutes. Sometimes it's only 15 for some kids who release hormones. Their hormones are released more quickly. And if you were to spit test that kid, if you were to test their saliva, you would actually notice that the moment that bedtime routine starts, the sleep hormones that are going to help them to fall asleep 30 minutes from them then already start to activate. So sleep hormones are not like stress hormones. Stress hormones, like adrenaline and cortisol, the things that wake them up for them to be overtired, but also the things that send them into fight or flight. These are things that activate in our body in a split second, literally in less than a second. Our body responds to the presence of adrenaline or cortisol. Sleep hormones are not like that. It's not an instantaneous thing. It takes time for our body to kind of feel those things and start to wind down. And so that's the importance of the bedtime routine. People don't understand why bedtime routines are important, but the reason why they're important is because it actually changes the physical chemistry of your child's body, the hormonal chemistry of their body. By doing the bedtime routine in this way, you set up the cascade of hormones to occur at the exact same time every day, and it just makes your life a whole lot easier. It also removes all places from that routine for autonomy-seeking behaviors. And this is another thing that happens with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. They get into a no phase and an autonomy-seeking phase, and then that impacts and intersects with all aspects of their life. Well, one of the easiest ways to avoid a fight, a tantrum, a meltdown, again, this is for Lisa, yes, you, and also Megan. The easiest way to do that is to create a rock-hard routine. Because the routine, the child really has nowhere in the routine to have those autonomy-seeking behaviors. Maybe it's they get to pick the book. Like you can build some autonomy in, but if it's there's 3 books every night, then there's 3 books every night. If it's we read all the books that are in your bed, then it's we read all the books in your bed. Whatever the routine is, you're going to stick to it rigidly. So you're going to figure out a routine. Bath time, PJs, brush teeth, storing a song. Maybe that's going to be yours. Ours is pretty similar to that. I'll be honest, guys. With my almost 2-year-old, it's PJs, brush teeth. We read 3 or 4 board books, real short, and I sing a song at the end. And then we actually say goodnight to like different things around the room. That's like our little bonus one that we have. But you don't have to add to that. We do that, and my kid's out in 15 minutes every night. People go, that's crazy, John. You can't expect every kid to do that. You're absolutely right. That never worked that well for my 7-year-old. Some kids are going to be more difficult with bedtime routine. They're going to require more coaxing. It's just going to be harder for them. But my 1-year-old used to not be like that. Not until we established that very, very consistent bedtime routine and we could get those hormones working the right way and we were actually putting them down at the right time. Then all of a sudden it worked. If I missed that by half an hour, guys, my 2-year-old's bouncing off the walls. If I mess up that routine, now I can vary it now because it's so rock hard set in stone for months, like 2 months now, that I can vary it and it's not going to like totally throw them off. But if I vary it too much, if I try, like we're out late at a holiday party or something, like, man, like I can't do any of it. It's just way too late. And I just got to try and hit that sleep window. It's a crapshoot. It's a coin flip. Is this going to go really off the rails or is it going to be easy? You know, I try and do at least one piece of it, no matter what. And I always have to do PJs and brush teeth, right? Because you got to brush your kids' teeth. If you're not brushing your kids' teeth, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But yeah, so that's what I have for you. Those are kind of my 3. How do we handle, you know, overtired, undertired? What's that all about? What's wake windows all about? How do we deal with nightmares and fear and anxiety around going to bed alone? And then last, how do we deal with what is so important about bedtime routines? If you knock out those 3 things about up to age 7, you're going to have a really, really amazing, transformative experience with sleep. You will find that so much of the things can be handled by those simple things that we talked about today. So yeah, that's it. That's what we got on sleep. Hey guys, just jumping in one more time to say thank you for listening to this episode. And once again, if you have not reviewed this podcast yet, please go ahead and do that. Hit that 5-star. Tell me what you think of it in the comments. I read every single review. And one more little call to action here that I keep being told that I don't talk about enough, and it is my membership. I have a membership of parents just like you who are connecting around the issues and the types of things that I talk about here on the podcast. In fact, in that membership, I do regular group coaching sessions that are just like this podcast, except for they're live. They are live on Zoom with me, where parents get to ask their questions. They don't have to wait and find out if I'm going to listen, or I always listen, but if I'm going to use their question for a podcast episode, they can get real-time answers from me in the moment and then have feedback and discuss things. We also do workshops in that membership. There's a kind of a robust community that we're constantly working on to get more connection with. And it's hundreds of parents just like you who are just trying to do better. And so if you find value in this podcast, if the things that you hear from Whole Parent, whether in the email list, on this podcast, on social media, are resonating with you, go over to my Stan store at any of the links in the link in the description of this podcast, at the links in any of my social media feeds, and sign up for a month of that membership. it is going to absolutely change your life. So if you want to connect deeper, if you want to go deeper with Whole Parent, that is the best way you can do it. All right, let's get to the next episode.